I want to show you this Moleskine that I finished very recently. It's got 18 written on it and it took me 2 years to fill. As you can see at the top here, it says July 2019. I had always loved the thought of urban sketching, meeting up with other artists, painting from real life places, whether it was landscapes, buildings or crowds of people. I also had it in my head that urban sketches had to depict art in certain ways, and I had to use a fountain pen and it had to be really sketchy, there had to be outlines, and I'm not overly happy with how it turned out. I think my observation skills were a little lacking. I basically just ended up painting coffee over and over again. This gentleman's not too bad. It was obviously in the summer and they're looking over on the other side of the high street. What I did like to do was to draw with watercolor. I realized that I could use it quickly and efficiently in the time that I had. This is my parents' garden, that's their greenhouse and where they're growing their runner beans. This is from 2 years ago. I can see that structurally it's a little bit wonky. I am being hard on myself here. The colours could be a bit punchier, especially the contrast. I also took this sketchbook to an urban sketchers symposium in the Netherlands in Amsterdam. And because I wanted to hang out with these people painting and drawing outside, I felt like I had to fit in, that I wouldn't be accepted if I turned up at an urban sketchers meet, because I was actually really embarrassed by my early attempts. I saw what they had produced and they were all much better than mine. This is what was going on in my head. I quite like this one because this was at the airport waiting for my flight to get home. And it dawned on me, just as I tell my students, you have to practice and you have to produce bad art in order to understand what works and what doesn't. And I'm trying to add too many details. I know that now. This is the Priory. It used to be a former monastery back in the 14th and 15th centuries. I think I'm getting a better feel for buildings, but proportion and contrast is something I struggled with. I have no recollection who this woman is. I think she may have been a lady at a workshop I went to, and this is some hairs that I saw when I was driving home from my parents one Sunday. I had no purpose at this stage. I'm not entirely sure how many sketchbooks I was keeping at this time. It really was a case of accepting that I was the one holding myself back with a set of rules. I do tell my students to give yourself grace and be gentle with yourself. These were for an illustration that I put together about the protein content in beans. From the previous page to this page, it's probably another few months. This is now the spring of 2021. There's 2 random spreads about flowers. And now, this was from March 2022. So I've left this sketchbook now for another year. I remember this scene because I was in Cambridge in a cafe called Fitzbilly's. And also remind myself not to have so many shoulds of how I thought it should be filled in. It's a reminder of the journey that I had to take to embrace the suck. I've now come through and realised, although this process is really frustrating, and I think you probably relate to it, it has been incredibly beneficial. Sitting in a cafe, that's their currant bun and a cup of tea, breakfast items, fruit, her milk jug. I realised that I didn't have that many pages left, so I thought I'll give it one more try. And this is Tenby in Wales. On location, I sat on a beach and did this. It's not too bad, but I think it was overworked. What I learnt from this, moving on to this page here, this is actually Venice. I think when you see some of my work, I go straight in with watercolour, but when it comes to buildings, I do need a little bit of structure, which is fine. So as you see in these, I've used a brown pen to plot out just the main points. I feel so much better about it, and I'm working in a way that suits me. I really love this building here because I got this shadow just right, so I'm quite proud of myself. It's a case of turning up, doing the art, doing a little caring critique, saying, oh, I like the way I've done that window, then turning up and doing it again the next day, and not letting that inner critic rob you of that joy of creating a page. This is my breakfast that I had one morning at the Airbnb where we stayed in Venice, and I am comfortable painting like this. When it comes to fruit and kitchen objects, I don't need a line, so pretty pleased with that version. But when we come to buildings, I do need line, and that's fine. I sometimes feel there are rules and I make up my own rules, which is silly. Because as long as I fill up the sketchbook, it really doesn't matter. This is now moving on to a week I spent in Nice. I reserved this page for meals that I had and some continuous line drawing that I did with Kosher. Another meal I shared. Terry Runyon drew that cat in for me as a little treat. Aperol spritz in the afternoon, and other people who were on that retreat with me, and a particular lunch that I had. This sketchbook represents many things, but especially a personal journey I had to get through in dealing with that comparison, the inner critic, embracing those wonky lines. It is all part of this process of being a creative artist, and by sharing this with you in quite an open manner, I hope you appreciate that even for me, who's been keeping sketchbooks for over 6 years, I still have the same critical thoughts about what I produce. I too have to overcome them in order to progress. This sketchbook was me getting out of my comfort zone. If you compare the buildings that I was painting at the beginning of the book compared to 2 years later, I can see an improvement, so I think it's been well worth it.